Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on mentoring youth impacted by substance abuse and the opioid crisis, or substance use and the opioid crisis. We're so grateful to have all of you on today. We're going to take about 2 minutes to just let everyone get situated and join us today. So feel free to, if you're hearing me now, go ahead and chat in maybe your first name, where you're joining from, and what organization you work with, if you do work with one. That'll give us a sense of who's on the call, but we'll do a little bit more get to know you in a few minutes and just give everyone a couple minutes to get situated. Welcome. See, we have 188 people on today already, and it's just about 2 o'clock. So we are always thrilled to see numbers like that. Thank you all for joining us for this very important conversation. We've got a lot of really great stuff planned for you. So we'll just get started in just about one more moment, but thank you for joining us. And if you've just joined, please feel free to just type maybe your first name, where you're joining from, and if you work with a specific mentoring or youth development program or a different type of service for young people, go ahead and type that into the chat box so we can get to know a little bit who we have on the call today.
Great to see all the different states.
Lots of good stuff in the chat. Thanks everyone for introducing yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Delia Hagan. I'm the Director of Program and Training Delivery at Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, as well as I work to help manage the OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center in partnership with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP. So I'm very, very honored to be your facilitator for today's conversation on mentoring youth impacted by substance use and the opioid crisis. We're very, very grateful to all of you for joining today. Our registration numbers were so high for this webinar, so it just feels like such an important conversation to bring everyone together for, and we're really hoping that it's an interactive conversation. So I'll be sharing with you in a moment how to engage with us throughout the conversation. Even though we do have a big group, we want to hear from you. So we've got some fantastic panelists that I'll be introducing to you in a moment. Very excited to feature them today and to have them share some insights with you. So I'm going to start by just going over some quick housekeeping, and then we're going to ask you a couple more questions about yourselves too, so we can get to know you a little bit better. So first, you may have noticed all attendees have been muted for best sound. However, as I said, we want this to be a participatory experience. We want to hear from you. So we really hope that you'll use that Q&A button at the top of or the side of your screen in that control panel. So go ahead and type in any kind of questions you have for our panelists throughout the webinar. We want to hear you, kind of sharing your thoughts and questions as we go, so we can hopefully kind of adapt the conversation to what you want to get out of today. We have Martha O'Connell from Mentor is going to be sharing your questions towards the end. So she's going to be moderating the Q&A portion of the webinar. And because we can't possibly get to everybody's questions, we're going to probably choose the ones that we think most will enrich the conversation. And hopefully they'll be, we'll be able to share contact information after the webinar. So if you didn't get your question answered, but you really want it answered, we'll give you a way to follow up and make sure you get what you need today. But welcome everyone, and we think that all this information hopefully will be handy for you. Just one other reminder, we want to note that today's webinar is being recorded, and in about a week, everybody will be receiving, all of you who are on today's webinar will be receiving an email with a copy of the slides and a link to the recording, so you don't feel like you have to take too many notes today. And these materials are also going to be posted on the OJJDP NMRC website, which we'll give you the link for right down there on your screen. If you haven't checked it out yet, definitely a great resource. And just one other reminder, we would like to continue to update and improve our webinars. So there's going to be a short survey, less than 3 minutes, that launches directly after the webinar. So we hope you'll take that and share your feedback about today, how it went, and what you'd like to see more from us in the future. So here's a little bit about what we plan to cover today in the next 90 minutes. It's going to be a fast 90 minutes. We're going to do some intros. We're going to have Elizabeth Joy, who is our moderator today, share some current context and facts. We're going to hear mentoring insights from 2 OJJDP funded mentoring programs, Aluna and Road Recovery. So Jean and Brian are here from those 2 organizations to share their work with you. And then we're going to launch into a panel discussion moderated by Elizabeth with Jean and Brian. And that's where we'd really like to hear a lot of your questions as well and incorporate those. And we're going to do, again, some more Q&A and then talk about resources. Make sure you're leaving here with what you need. So just a little bit about who we are before we jump right into the discussion. The National Mentoring Resource Center, if you don't know too much about us, we are an OJJDP funded program. We are a cooperative agreement between OJJDP and the NMRC and Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. So we work together to bring this resource to the field. And we're so grateful for OJJDP's continued support of the mentoring field through evidence-based resources, training, technical assistance. So the NMRC really builds on the OJJDP's history, leadership, and investments in quality youth mentoring over the years. And the key components of the NMRC, if you don't know too much about us, we've got this great website, nationalmentoringresourcecenter.org. There's so much to see on there. You can really find everything you need. And we just relaunched a new website where it's a lot easier to find what you need. So that's a good thing since there's so much there. We have a research board that vets all of the resources that go up on that site, so you know you're getting something quality when you're looking at that website. And we also have no cost training and technical assistance for mentoring programs across the country to support the work you do, make sure it's aligned with evidence-based practices for mentoring. So we hope to hear from you through TA, and we'll share more about that at the end of this call as well. Just a little bit about Mentor if you don't know us. You may have heard of the elements of effective practice for mentoring. Much of our work is based on that publication, and we try to bring it into real life through webinars and lots of different other services, the National Mentoring Summit, things along those lines. If you don't know us, we're our affiliates. We hope you'll check us out as well. So that's just a little bit about us and who we are. Now we'd like to hear a little bit more about you. So we are going to ask you to complete some polls. Hopefully you've learned how to do this by joining some Zoom meetings. If not, it's very easy. I'm going to go ahead and launch the first one right now. And this question is the easiest possible. It's just a yes or no question or an I don't know. Are you currently serving youth facing substance use challenges or addiction? And that can be, for the purposes of our discussion today, either their own challenges or that of a family member's, because we know there's certainly different unique challenges associated with each of those experiences. So go ahead and weigh in. Are you serving youth faced with those challenges? Or are you not, or do you not know? And I'll give you just a couple more seconds, 3 more seconds to respond before I share out the results. All right, here we go. We've got 75% of you say, yes, I know that I am serving youth who are facing these challenges. About 19% feel that you're not, and then about 6% on the fence don't know. So that's really interesting and helpful info. And I think we'll share some more facts and figures that might inform some of this as well in just a little bit. So I'm going to launch one more poll, and this is another question just about your work. So are you serving affected youth, so youth who are affected by substance use? Are you serving them through mentoring or youth development programming, school, mental and behavioral health services, other social services, legal services, or something else? So we just want to know at what angle are you coming to this conversation from, and what way are you working with young people? We'll give you a couple more seconds to respond. 2 more seconds. And then we'll end the poll and share the results out. So looks like quite a number of us, about a third, are coming from the mentoring and youth development space. About 7% of folks coming from schools, 13% mental and behavioral health, that makes sense. And then other social services, 18%, legal services, 18%, that's interesting. And then other is 11%. So feel free, if you're other, to share some more detail about what that looks like in your work in the chat. And then finally, I am going to ask you all to weigh in on a third question, but this time in the chat. So we're going to ask, what questions do you have as we begin this webinar? So we want to know what's on your mind as it relates to mentoring young people who are affected by substance use or the opioid crisis. So we're just going to let you take a moment to put your questions in the chat. And I'm going to ask Martha to read some of the responses just to get an idea of where all of your heads are at as we enter this conversation. Hopefully we can kind of weave in some of the things you want to know as we start our discussion. So Martha, are you seeing any questions pop into the chat?
Don't see any yet. Yeah, feel free to put in any questions you have at the start, and you'll have another chance to ask at the end as well. Okay, so we have some questions coming in. How do we get past the stigma of this? How do we start the conversation? How do we try to break the cycle of addiction when these kids are brought up in home with addiction? How can we educate our mentors about this so they are supported and can support their youth? Loving to hear about some icebreakers, ways to create rapport with mentors in our programs. Lots of really thoughtful questions. What are some best practices for serving this specific population of youth? Thank you so much for all these questions. And it looks like a lot of these we're gonna be discussing throughout our webinar.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Martha, for giving us an idea of what's going on in the chat, and keep them coming. Use the Q&A specifically if you want us to raise your question up. That's a good way to make sure we don't lose your question, but appreciate everybody sharing a little bit more about you and what how you're entering into this conversation today. So now I would like you to meet our moderator and our two panelists for today. So I'm going to start with our panelists, Jean Bowen and Brian Moss, I believe. I'm sorry, I butchered your last name again. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go start with Jean. So in 1992, Jean Bowen was faced with the reality of imminent death from an out of control habit. For 10 years, he had been a tour manager for a variety of artists. And ironically, he was also responsible for helping particular artists stay clean. With the help of family, friends, and the music industry colleagues like artist manager Jack Bookbinder, Jean was one of the lucky ones who embraced recovery. Understanding how lucky he was to survive, Jean and Jack set out to build an organization to educate young people about addiction and other adversities in hopes of helping them find their way toward a healthy and happy future. They look to publicize the many strengths and resources available from the music and entertainment industries and the mental health field. With the support of Sony Music Entertainment, DreamWorks Records, Warner Music Group, and Jeff Buckley Music, as well as mental health and substance abuse specialists, entertainment industry professionals who face their own personal adversities, the Road Recovery Foundation, a nonprofit 501c3 organization, was established in February of 1998. So welcome, Jean, and thanks for sharing a little bit more about yourself. Looking forward to hearing more from you in a few minutes. So next, I'd like to introduce Brian Moss. He is the Director of Addiction Prevention and Mentoring Programs at Aluna and oversees Camp Mariposa, an award-winning evidence-informed addiction prevention and mentoring program for youth affected by a family member's substance use disorder. Camp Mariposa is offered in 17 locations across the United States. Brian has over 30 years of experience working with youth and families from diverse backgrounds. He holds a Master of Arts degree from LaSalle University. Mr. Moss has written articles featured in national magazines and presented nationally at conferences such as the Child Welfare League of America and the National Mentoring Summit. Welcome, Brian, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And finally, let me introduce Elizabeth Joy. Aside from being my friend and one of my favorite people, Elizabeth is a CEO, a trainer, and a speaker and a consultant. She is the former director of Mentor Central Ohio with a background in clinical social work and over 20 years of experience working with youth and families, trauma survivors, and substance use and abuse treatment. She is the author of the critically acclaimed book, You Survived, Now What?, which I have on my desk at my office, and I highly recommend it. Elizabeth partners with Mentor to deliver trauma-informed training curricula and tools for the NMRC TA providers that work with programs directly, so they can equip programs with the right information and context to effectively serve youth impacted by substance use. So welcome, Elizabeth. And now I'm going to transition things over to you so you can take us from here.
Thanks so much, Delia, for the very warm welcome. It is great to be here with you and everyone across the country. Shout out to all the Mentor affiliates who are on. I saw a couple of those folks on. I also have to give a biased shout out to all the MSW students out there. I am a licensed independent social worker, so I certainly appreciate you all have chosen this amazing field. And I also wanted to shout out CASA. I was a CASA volunteer for a long time, and I knew I know they do great work, and there are several CASA volunteers on the line. So shout out to everyone for joining us. And thank you so much for committing to continuing to learn, because we know the content, as hard as we try to give you juicy stuff today, we will not be able to answer all of your questions, but we appreciate your staying committed to this work and to learning. All right, Delia, we'll kick it right off, and I'll spend a few moments in the 2020 influences, although we're all very much sharing this very difficult time, right? So the 2020, which has become 2020/2021 reality, is certainly a very, has had a significant impact on opioid use, right? So I think we've all kind of settled in, I guess, normalizing what's abnormal, but certainly isolation is an issue that we're all facing, and that definitely is impacting usage rates and overdose rates. Lack of routine, feeling out of control and powerless for a lot of us, just not having choice about where we can go or how we go about doing it is certainly a stressful experience. Of course, there's the fear of death and concerns about vaccines and whether or not they're effective, and all of that stuff is going on. And of course, meanwhile, there's a social justice movement going on, and while that's great stuff, it's also very heavy stuff, right? So those are all the things that in thinking about opioids and how they're impacting the world right now, there are things that are unique to the time we're in right now. Delia, we'll move on into, actually, you can skip this slide and go right into the next one. I know some of you had asked in the chat, well, how is COVID and the COVID reality affecting usage? And the answer is yes, usage has gone up across the country. So this slide, I won't get into too much detail, but you can see on the left, you have all drugs, and then the other drugs are broken out within those other three categories, and you can see across the board that there's certainly an increase in drug use. I do want to point out that, and even in my work with Mentor earlier on, when the original opioid epidemic was really on the scene, if you will, we had even discovered then that sometimes what folks think of when they think of opioid epidemic limits their ability to think broader. And what we do know is that, yes, there's prescription drug misuse, but there's a lot of other stuff that's being used and a lot of other drugs. So I would just encourage you not to be limited in what you think about when you think about what drugs might be impacting the youth you're serving and or their families. On the next slide, this gives you just an idea of where we are with the locations. Now, when the opioid epidemic really sort of kicked off and it was very much on folks' radar, it was very much a conversation about rural areas and smaller cities, which even back then, there was certainly use in bigger cities, but we saw a lot of use in those rural areas. Well, as of right now, and this is a 12-month run, I believe these are from 2020, we've seen increased deaths in large cities. And there's only been 4 states in which there's been a decrease in those death rates. And then deaths involving fentanyl now are in the western states more, 10% increase. So back again, when the epidemic first started, we were seeing a lot in rural areas in the Midwest, where I'm from. Columbus, Ohio was a big one. And we didn't see as much on the West Coast, but now we're seeing essentially across the board. It's a concern no matter where you land. So just wanted to show those to you all to give you update stats. If you're not familiar with what and where are these challenges happening. So Delia, we'll skip right into the trauma piece, and we're going to have a great discussion today. But I wanted to just cover a little bit about trauma. And for those of you who are new to Mentor, I know Delia mentioned it, and she does work for Mentor. So it's her job to say that Mentor is awesome, but I don't work for Mentor. And I would urge you, if you are not familiar with Mentor and their resources, please, 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 many of the questions you all are asking, there are extensive detailed trainings. Some of them I've developed, and I know Jean and Brian do a lot of work with Mentor as well. There are great resources out there. So please make sure you go and access those resources. But for today, I did want to just kind of set the tone when we talk about trauma-informed mentoring, which hopefully you're doing. If not, again, the National Mentoring Partnership is certainly a resource for you. It's just important to understand when we think about drug use and misuse, is that trauma is both a consequence and a cause for drug use. So for those of you who are familiar with the ACE study, which essentially said that the more negative experiences and traumatic experience you have as a child, the more likely you are to have adverse realities as an adult, which includes early death. And so want to just really make sure we understand when we're serving youth whose parents are using or misusing drugs, many of them that they got to that point by experiencing something traumatic and perhaps got into using as a way to cope with the pain and didn't know what else to do. And so just remembering that even when we support youth and we're focused on youth doing well and their parents are struggling, it's oftentimes related to some trauma that they've experienced. So we'll see in the next slide, Delia, that trauma and substance use affects parenting in a lot of different ways. So those of you who are working with youth impacted probably see this, right? So we see neglect and just struggling with being able to give attention or being unresponsive. We've got on the complete opposite side, a parent that might struggle with being overly permissive and just kind of allowing their child or their children to do kind of whatever they want. Enmeshment, like lack of boundaries and just kind of being BS with their child. Failure to provide supervision or structure in the children's life. Of course, high stress during pregnancy is definitely a challenge, and use during pregnancy is a challenge. And then harsh discipline could also be something that we see as far as an effect of parenting or of use on parenting. And of course, we know that basic needs tend to fall by the wayside in those situations as well. And I do want to point out, these are all risk factors for youth to then engage in use later. So when we look at supporting youth who are impacted, and I know some of you are serving youth who are struggling with use, other of you are serving youth whose parents or caregivers are. And so these are definitely things we want to have on our radar, because again, these have been shown to be risk factors for youth using or misusing drugs. On the next slide, Delia, if you could go forward, just kind of looking at this experience of living in a household where misuse and addiction are alive and well. In summary, it's a traumatic experience, right? So there's this feeling of abandonment, which could either be that the parents actually not home because they're out using or struggling and, you know, wandering wherever they are, or it could just be emotional abandonment, which we talked about earlier. Assuming the role of a caregiver so they can become the parent, right, of their siblings, where they're helping them get dressed, helping them with homework, or even for themselves, kind of becoming their own parent, if you will. There's challenges with feeling guilt and shame, pressure to either perform or underperform. We heard this in the listening tour we did a couple years ago. There are some youth who their parents are asking them not to do well in school so that they're able to get access to certain resources or supports, financial supports. Others are trying to perform really well, so they kind of stay under the radar and stay out of the way, and the attention they get is going to be good attention. Lack of basic needs, we talked about that already. Of course, the potential for witnessing use is obviously traumatic, and or other inappropriate behaviors that may be going on in the home. This constant cycle of hope and disappointment. If you've ever had a loved one who is struggling with misuse, then you know it's this, if they're at least at a point where they're trying to get better, then you know that 9 times out of 10, there's a cycle of an attempt for recovery or sobriety, and then oftentimes that doesn't work out, right? And so the children kind of going through that cycle. And then of course, there's the obvious grief that you would have as a child if the person that you, who is taking care of you, your caregiver or your parent, passes away from addiction. So we kind of just wanted to set the stage, one, to just help us to think about trauma as we move forward in this conversation, and 2, to just remind you that all of this is going on, right? And so if you're dealing with a youth, and I saw there was a lot of folks on from juvenile probation, where maybe you have some youth who are engaging in some not so awesome behaviors, I just want to encourage you to take that trauma-informed lens. So even when the behavior they're displaying isn't ideal, remember that there's probably some experience, right, that they're dealing with and processing. And for them, this may be the only way they know how to process. So we have to figure out how we can hold them accountable for their behavior, but love on them at the same time. So we're going to move on into the presentation now and kick it over to Brian from Aluna, who's going to share about his program and some of the things that he recommends just based on his experience with the Aluna program. Take it away, Brian.
All right. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to the NMRC, OJJDP for this opportunity. So I want to tell you about the program I run, Camp Mariposa. It is a year-round addiction prevention and mentoring program that's specifically designed to support youth who have a close family member who struggles with a substance use disorder. So most often, more than 90% of the time, it's one or both parents who struggles with a substance use disorder. And really our goal is to break the cycle of addiction, the intergenerational cycle of addiction, like Elizabeth had mentioned previously. And we do that by creating a really positive support community for kids, as well as providing them with the tools and coping skills that build resiliency, that also mitigate some of the negative consequences of ACEs that Elizabeth also mentioned previously. So next slide. So you can you can load them all up. That would be great. So the three I'll highlight here, obviously, we want to delay first use, reduce or eliminate involvement in the juvenile justice system. But the ones I want to highlight are creating the positive peer support network. So we do run a group and a peer mentoring model. And we also want to create a positive community by connecting kids, youth, and their families with caring and supportive mentors. And so we have a therapeutic clinical aspect to the program, but the last piece that's all in capital letters, letting kids be kids, that is so crucial to working with kids who are impacted by substance use in their family. So often, childhood, the things you think of about childhood, some of the other things that Elizabeth highlighted, get lost and kids, have trouble just having childhood and having fun. So I always like to emphasize letting kids be kids is one of our goals. Next. So just to give you kind of an overview of the program, like I said, we do use a group and a peer mentoring model. So for us, the same youth, the same trained adult mentors all make a minimum of a 1-year commitment to the program. Obviously, not everybody is able to fulfill that commitment, but the overwhelming majority of youth and mentors do. The other piece is that more than half, probably close to 2/3, participate for multiple years. So we really do take a long-term approach to working with youth and families. The core of the program are 6 free weekend camps that are held every other month throughout the year. So there's a nice combination of traditional camp activities like swimming, canoeing, high ropes, low ropes courses, combined with educational and support activities. So we do use evidence-based programming. We're beginning to implement now the Too Good for Drugs curriculum. I actually just left the training with all of our partners from across the country to sit in on this webinar. So, we're really excited to implement that. We also implement a suicide prevention program, Signs of Suicide. Our core group of kids for the weekend camps are 9 to 12-year-olds. And over the last, say 5 or 6 years, we've really been developing our teen component to the program. So the first thing we did was develop a peer mentor junior counselor component. So those are teens who went through the program, have this skill set, have the interest, or are willing to get some training to serve as peer mentors. We think that's critical when working with youth affected by substance use. And our most recent expansion now with our current OJJDP grant is really building standalone teen programs. So those are day camps, overnight camps specifically designed for teenagers. And the last piece I'll highlight is the family engagement piece. And so that's another thing that I think is really critical to the success in working with youth. So, you know, we work with kids 6 weekends a year, plus these additional activities, but they do go home to often challenging situations. So engaging families, engaging parents, caregivers is critical. And we're in 17 locations, that was highlighted, and we are opening, we're in the process of opening our first international location in Toronto the beginning of next year. Next. So just, this is one of the kind of core organizing principles for all of our activities. The 7 C's was developed by Jerry Moe out of Betty Ford Hazelden. And so we kind of weave this into our program, and I think it's a great model for looking at serving youth as well as supporting mentors. So the first 3 really are acknowledging limits and what you can and cannot control. So many youth come in thinking, oh, if I didn't fight with my siblings, if I didn't get in trouble in school, my parent wouldn't be using the substances. So, you know, helping them understand that they didn't cause it, can't control it, and can't cure it. And the last 4 are really critical as well. So we put a lot of emphasis on self-care. I'll talk a little bit later about the importance for self-care for mentors, because this is really hard work. Developing good communication skills, taking healthy risks and making good choices, and also the importance of celebrations and rituals. And those on the right-hand side are just a touchstone project that we do often, and they're just positive messages that we hand out at the camp weekends. Next. So the key strategies, I think, from our experience in doing this work is to build a wide web of support for youth. And so that's connecting them with peers. There's a lot that helps to break down stigma and isolation. Then the next step is building it with those slightly older adolescents. Those are great role models. And then the trained adult mentors are critical. And with that, you know, consistency and reliability with the mentors is essential. So recruiting strong mentors and retaining them. So, you know, we strongly believe in having some mentors with a clinical background, because this work is challenging and kids can get triggered very easily. And it's important to have that piece built into your programming. Not everybody needs to be a clinician, so the diversity is also important. Like I said, learning how to take healthy risks, we think is critical. So in our model, you know, kids get to try things they've never tried. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then, like I had said previously, engaging families to participate in programming. We did, when we first started out, in 2007. We added that piece in about 2014, 2015, and it really has helped the program strengthen. So next. So just a few additional resources. So I work for Aluna. The program is Camp Mariposa. So I highly recommend checking out our website, alunanetwork.org. In addition to Camp Mariposa, we have the Camp Barron program, which is the largest network of grief camps in the United States. And so it's open to youth grieving any type of death. So it doesn't have to be opioid or substance specific. We also have a really fantastic resource center where you as professionals, as mentors, can go on there and get information about trauma, about grief, about substance use in the family. All of our resources are always free to families, to youth, and to you as professionals. There's the Camp Mariposa website. For more information, we had an awesome story on our program in Dayton that was featured on NPR back, it's almost a couple of years ago now, but the reporter, I thought, captured the program really well. Next. So I will now pass it over to Gene Bowen.
Thanks, Brian. Congratulations going to Canada.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, hello, America. And thank you all for having us. So just a little bit about Road Recovery. So we're a New York-based nonprofit comprised of music industry professionals who have all dealt with or faced their own personal adversities in life and want to give back. We strive, we're not an arts program, we're a communications program. We strive to provide a safe space for young people to come together and express their feelings, their voice, and their message. And then the old slip them the vegetables when you give them the stew. We teach a lot of life skills. So in the process of them expressing and collaborating with professionals from our industry and turning their voice into some type of creative medium, whatever that is, whatever they want to do, we're then teaching them the life skills of taking that and engaging them through the process of creating, planning, and executing their own state-of-the-art live performances and recording projects to elevate their voice and to show the value of their voice to reach a wider audience, both their peers, but also their community. Most importantly, we don't work alone. We partner with youth organizations, youth institutions, and mental health professionals. And this is critical to the way that Road Recovery operates, is that we, by partnering with these institutions, we also seek and have, which they themselves provide oversight, clinical oversight and support, not only for our staff, but for our participants. We have a video which Delia is going to, hopefully it's going to work, technology, hopefully here. So this is about, this is an overview of our TRACS program, but from, we've been doing for over the last year, we've actually been able to deliver this to Oasis clubhouses across New York State virtually. So this will highlight the key components of what a Road Recovery program it comprises of anywhere and any population of kids that we service. Go for it, Delia.
Road Recovery's action-driven virtual TRACS program was created to give our amazing youth and young adults an opportunity for their voice to be heard loudly and clearly when they find themselves stuck in isolation and cut off from their support networks. The Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention awarded funding to Road Recovery for the grant Opioid Affected Youth Initiative. To launch virtual TRACS programs in all corners of New York, Road Recovery has again partnered with the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports, Oasis, and their statewide youth clubhouses located in all 10 Empire State regions. The statewide youth clubhouses provide a community-based, non-clinical setting for promoting long-term recovery through skill building, recreation, education, wellness, evidence-based prevention programs, and other social activities.
feeling, but hope is also an empowerment.
My hopes for next year are to grow a better place for people to live, more people to have more food, for more people to come together.
Sometimes you have to deal with something you don't like, but that's fine. Just look on the bright side. You don't gotta say I'm right. You just gotta take your time. You just gotta live your life. You just gotta choose from wrong or right.
Yes, you have my heart still, only as a pretty piece of roadkill. Yes, you have my heart still, only as a pretty piece of roadkill. I found hope in the darkest of days. I found hope in the simplest ways. Shine light through the darkness. Come on, days. I found hope. What's most important to road recovery is to meet young people where they're at. For some, coming together in a virtual space is fun, but for others, working in small online groups, one-on-one, or individually offline with staff from their youth clubhouse whom they know and trust creates a safe environment for youth participation.
I'm Alexi. I like the tracks program, and I love music, and I like being able to express myself.
I like coming to the clubhouse because I like music, I like to meet people, and I think I can become somebody doing music.
Hi, my name is Dom. I like participating in the virtual tracks program because it helps me work on my videography skills.
Throughout this crisis, Road Recovery has been able to stay connected each week with our clubhouse youth and their staff through multiple virtual peer support check-in meetings, learning and practicing healthy coping skills together, and creative workshops that provide educational and enriching life skills and teaching moments for the youth engaged in our virtual tracks programs.
Say it loud, y'all. We just love each other. We just love.
Road Recovery's creative staff mentors, each youth clubhouse staff member, and young participants all work together toward producing a series of short video clips shared each week across several social media platforms.
The life of a gay man and woman is very hard because we have people looking at us like we don't belong.
It worked. Do we have audio?
I think we do. Delia, are you putting the PowerPoint back up now? Perfect.
Yeah, here we go. Thanks for your patience.
Okay. So do you want to go to the key strategies? There. Oh, great. So I wanted to highlight how we come to this and how we work with youth that are dealing with substance abuse issues, or directly or indirectly, and how we've sort of built the Road Recovery House. And really it starts with who are we, and really spending time to identify who we are and knowing ourselves, specifically with the relationship of substance abuse or drug and alcohol use, and also who we're not at the same time, which is really, really important. And we find that in order to to work with young people, one has to have their own, know themselves first before venturing in, because as we know, you can't BS kids. And when you're dealing with an issue like this is really life and death. So one of the things that's the way the Road Recovery House is built is wherever we go, there is supervision at all times. At all times. We stay in our lane. So as our mission statement says, we are from the entertainment industry who have all dealt with their own personal adversity. And that's who we are. When it comes to specifically the issues and the things that are going to come up with young people surrounding this topic, we lean heavily into those who are licensed and those who know how to handle such situations. So one of the things is by first identifying what is my relationship with this issue in my own personal life and what is appropriate to share. That's the other. Because the minute you start engaging young people in this, you're going to kick up stuff. And without the proper supervision around having that guidance and support can become a really very dangerous and slippery slope. So one of the things that we have with our staff is that you never carry anything that's just feeling uncomfortable or all. We have someone to turn to provide us with guidance and support of how to deal with it. Being honest with the young people and also understanding where one can be vulnerable. It's amazing how you can go into a room, it doesn't matter the difference in age, sexual identity, race, but the minute an adult becomes vulnerable with young people, maybe not the first time, but over time, they will open up. But being vulnerable, one has to also understand what is appropriate in being vulnerable. And that's where guidance and support of before ever venturing into working with young people is really important. Clear communication with young people is at all times is paramount in the work we do. For instance, we're outsiders usually coming into an institution. And by nature of people from the entertainment industry, a lot of walls generally come down with the kids. And we have found many times that they will share things with us that they've never shared with anyone else. Well, the responsibility of holding on to that is enormous. So we make it very clear to the kids that there are people involved in working with us that are guiding us, and that any information they give us, we are going to hand over. There'll be full transparency. And when I speak about the vulnerableness of it, by nature, we have people from our industry that are coming in and speaking about their own personal adversities, both what they've been through and what they're living now as a solution, which is also in terms of medication and in counseling can really change the dynamic of how young people are looking at those in authority, whether it's people with white coats, and illustrating, showing them that, hey, I participate in therapy, I participate in this support, which has a dramatic effect on my life, which allows me to be in and have this career or have this life and afford this opportunity. One of the things so there are three components of the program every time we meet with the young people, and they're in the order of importance, and that is, we always ask, how are you? We start with a check-in meeting. How are you? What's going on? Not only for myself, but what's going on with you, and sharing those topics. From there, taking those ideas or those expressions or those things that are maybe weighing on, whether it's abandonment issues or poverty or something going on at home, and then using that as a means to explore that deeper and transforming that into some type of creative medium. And basically to show these young people that you have value. So many of our young people today are, because of the situations they're dealing with, are told that they have no value, that they're garbage. But by empowering them and showing them that you have a voice, and your voice can save your generation. And we always say to them, we're like Charlie Brown parents, wah, 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 Charlie Brown adults. But you guys are going to save each other. and you have a voice, and we respect that voice, and we want to hear what that voice is, no matter what it is. So we come to the table very open. We don't come with a cookie cutter approach. We come and meet them where they're at, what's going on, because this is all about building relationships, and relationships take time. And with that, what we have found at the end of the day, the most important thing that we can do for young people is one thing, and that's just showing up. The power of consistency and the power of showing up for the majority of the kids that we work with is unprecedented. In fact, it's so conceptual that they can't get their head around it. And it's really through actions that change really occurs and trust develops. And it's through those actions and through that consistency and showing up and telling them that they have value, and then transforming their voice, their feelings, whatever it is, as radical as it is, as we always say, we can do anything as long as it doesn't harm ourselves or harm someone else. But we have the potential of reaching a large audience, all because of you. And the whole idea that an individual is coming into this and then working as a collective, and the power of we, in the end, the power of we is what it's about. So those are just some basic, the structure in which we enter into this forum of dealing with this very scary, this very dangerous, and in this life-threatening area that has eradicated so many of our young people in our society. I think Elizabeth, I think that will go on from there. Might open up.
Thank you, Jean. I appreciate your presentation, and I really appreciate just having the opportunity to see the youth that we're here, that we're gathered here today to support. It's always nice when you can just be reminded of why we're even here. So thank you for sharing that video. I did want to ask a quick question. Liz wondered if your program is something that they could engage with online. She's in a rural area, so I wasn't sure, can connect with your program or how that works.
Well, thanks. I guess the glass is half full. Thanks to COVID, we were completely shut down, and all of our staff got in a room, and in a week we figured out how to do this virtually. So yes, we are now, as Brian's going to Canada, we are also looking to where we can do this virtually elsewhere in the country. So welcome conversations around that to see if maybe we could set something up.
Awesome. And I believe later we're going to be sharing Jean's contact information. So for those of you who are interested in maybe a follow-up with him on that, we'll make sure that you get that information. All right, so we're going to kick into the discussion. We have some questions we thought we would throw out there, but I got to give it to the audience. You guys are asking some amazing questions in the Q&A already. So I'm gonna go with Haley's question, which I think is really important, Jean and Brian. Haley asked, what is the priority need to address when youth are experiencing issues with substance use? Because obviously there's a lot going on, right? So what's the priority focus? Jean, you wanna kick that off?
Well, first is safety. What does that look like? This stuff kills. And now today, what we're seeing with fentanyl and such, that people just they're dropping dead. So assessing what does that look like, what's behind it. Trauma is everything. I think there's a tremendous focus on the tip of the iceberg, which is the use. And unfortunately, our healthcare system is set up where we never get to the root because it requires time because of what that trauma has then over time has developed into some type of use or coping skill for them. But certainly assessing with support from addiction specialists of what's going on with the individual. That would be the first.
Thank you, Jean. I agree totally. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say, going back to what Jean talked about before, like, the consistency, the reliability to me is so important. And having relationships both between, youth and between youth and the adult mentors, I think is critical. And then weaving in there, teaching them some coping skills. So our program is really a prevention program. So our goal is to delay first use as long as possible. We definitely don't, think that kids will never use, but to delay that first significant use as long as possible to break that cycle.
Good call, Brian. Prevention is obviously the best policy. And I do want to reiterate as a clinician what Jean said. So often, especially when you're talking substance use, this is not a stat from anywhere specifically, but I'll just say 99% of the time-ish, right? When we see someone using, whether it's a youth or an adult, there's some other thing going on, right? So when Jean says tip of the iceberg, I think that's a really good point. And sometimes, especially with substance use, and Jean, you hit it, because I've worked clinically from a counseling perspective, and I've also worked in drug and alcohol treatment. And so often it's very unfortunate that most of the time when folks go for treatment, we're missing what's at the core, right? And so we're doing what I say is putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds, right? And so we've got to get to the why behind it in order to really get to solution. And sometimes that just doesn't happen. So to answer your question in summary, Haley, is as much as you can, really getting to, of course, the safety part, right? Jean, you called that out first, but other than that, just being supportive to begin with and hoping that we can get to the point of really understanding the why behind things. And that's why it's so important that we're trauma informed in our work, right? Because when we're trauma informed, we understand that's the whole process. This is what trauma informed is really all about, is to say that there's something behind this. And so when I can get to the something behind it, then we can really get to solutions. So Haley, thanks for that really, really great question. I want to ask for you guys, there are a lot of folks who have like mentoring or programming that's specific for drug and alcohol use, or opioid affected kind of focus points. But there are a lot of folks that's not the programming, right, that they're necessarily signed up to do, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to encounter youth who are impacted, therefore may not be prepared, right? So what's the first step for a program that may be encountering them, or maybe they're thinking about that maybe they need to increase their awareness or start to at least go down a path of being more officially educated about it and maybe implement some policies and approaches? What would you say, Brian, to a program like that?
Yeah, so I think, it dovetails a little bit on the previous question too, but I do think in this work, it's so multifaceted, multi-layered, intergenerational that not one of us, not one group could really address everything. Like we do a piece, Jean's group does a piece, Elizabeth and the mental health community helps out. So I do think, identifying local resources in your community. I mean, the traumas there with the kids that we work with and the older adolescents that Jean works with. So identifying really trusted, solid referral sources for youth and families, not to just give them a list, but to say, okay, I'm gonna help you get an appointment. And there could be other groups that do more fun stuff. And, you can connect with them. Kids need to have fun. The kids that we work with and bringing them together, having social activities, building that network of support to me is the first step. And to, both of our programs are pretty specific and, comprehensive, but do something is, I think, the first step, and look at, what are the needs in your community.
That's a good call, Brian, on the collaboration. Jean, I think we were on a call a couple months ago, and I think you stressed that. So I can't wait to hear what you have to add.
Yeah, to that point is who's around you. We can't nobody's got the silver bullet. Nobody's has Wonder Bread here, of really having those relationships in community. I mean, let's face it, it has been proven human beings cannot exist without some type of substance, right? We tried it with prohibition, didn't work, right? So we're wired to escape. We want to escape, and we do it all in different ways. Some become self-destructive. So I think the fact that we all are trying to escape the pain and misery and the challenges of life is there. But how do we go about it? And so absolutely knowing the landscape, getting educated. But again, for us, I'm a sober, recovering drug addict. That's who I am. I am not a therapist. I don't want to be a therapist, and I'm not going to, say that I am or anything. I'm going to stay in my lane. But I've surrounded myself, and the organization has surrounded itself with the people who know how to handle things, whether it's providing food on the table or whatever. And it really is the power of we. Brian, you were saying this, like, we're all coming to this from our lanes, but it's a collective. There was a famous woman who said it takes a village, right? That's what it does. It really entails, because in a lot of ways we become the family. As I always say, excuse my French, but the parents are more fucked up than the kids. So let's be real what we're dealing with. And a lot of times we become that family unit. But the one thing that's really about this is attraction is everything. The hardest population, the hardest creatures on this planet to reach are young people, hardest. And if you don't get their attention in the first 13 seconds, they're gone. And you need to offer them opportunities. So you can't sit on the couch and talk about your feelings. That only goes so far. You need to engage them. But if you engage them and empower them, and they feel that they have a stake in something, it's over at that point. And that's where you start to see the shift. That's where you start to see that change, where they start showing up. They want to be a part of it. They want direction. We all need structure, right? And young people need structure. So when that's there and they feel like they have an ownership of something, that's where the attraction. And then if you get to that point, that's where young people start attracting other young people.
That's a good call, Jean. Can you give us some examples? Because I know for me, if you ask any therapist, at some point you've probably done Uno with your client, right? Uno is just a winner, hands down, right? But you talk about the idea of creatively engaging, and if you do this work long enough, you get your own sort of toolbox. But Jean, give me a couple examples of creative ways that maybe you've engaged youth that are not the traditional sit down and tell me if you've been using, or sit down and tell me how you feel.
Just one that comes to mind of a young person who was on 16 psychotropic drugs when he came to us. He was 17 years old. So he was bloated, and I was having all sorts of problems. He loved music. He'd play any instrument. He asked for a team meeting with his clinical staff, which we did. And his clinician said, what I'm trying to do is slow down the machinery based on the way his brain works to insert new information. And as soon as I feel this traction, I'm going to start to remove a lot of the medication. Because this young person loved music, they would do a therapy session once a month to go see an orchestra. And that was it. They would go and enjoy the music, and that would be part of it. So it's really, a lot of it is thinking outside the box. It's really, again, meeting them where they're at. If a kid loves to play basketball, you can accomplish a lot by shooting a basketball with a kid on a court, just through that. And a body in motion, whether we all know what that does and the effect that has, as opposed to just sitting and staring at each other.
Thanks, Jean. That's a good one. Now I'm flashing back to all the basketball I played and all the missed shots. But definitely built relationships. Brian, any suggestions from you on creative engagement when we're trying to get especially youth from that quiet space or that resistant space into engaged?
Yeah, we do a lot with, creative arts and creative expression. So one of the things we do every weekend is there's an opportunity for kids in the program, teens in the program to write a letter to addiction. And so they're able to write how addiction, how substance use has impacted them. They're able to write whatever they want. For the 9 to 12-year-olds, especially, being able to curse and say whatever they want is engaging in that way. But they also have the opportunity to read it to the others in the group and then burn it in the campfire. And that is really cathartic for the kids in the program. And the other thing I'll highlight from the creative arts, we have a really nice partnership with this group based out in Seattle called Art with Heart. And they have a whole series of creative expression type books that can be done either individually by a youth or in a group setting. And to Jean's point, like, I think we use outdoor sports as well, and focusing on teamwork and cooperation and communication, and those are all critical skills to develop.
Brian, and I'm glad you brought that up. Oh, go ahead, Jean.
No, I was just going to say one thing, coming back to providing opportunities. You have to understand something, that when I was discharged from inpatient, I was 28 years old. They told me to change people, places, and things, find a new support group, continue with therapy, blah, blah. And that was required a lot of change in my life. But for young people, they have to stay in these polluted environments, which are high schools, grammar schools, middle schools, right? And unless you're giving them something that outweighs that. So for us, we didn't know this, but young people were reporting to us that when they were up against 6 of their friends saying, let's go rob that bodega, or let's smoke this joint, the way they got out of those sticky situations, they said, well, if I get high with you, or if I get caught up with the law, I can't go to road recovery. If I go to road recovery, I'm recording this song in a studio with X name musicians that are guests and actually I'm co-writing with, or Metallica is coming to town and James Hetfield's a big supporter of the organization. If I get high with you, I can't go and spend time at Madison Square Garden and be around this and hear his story. What they told us was that their friends then respected them and said, wow, okay, that's really cool. And then in some ways it attracted, like, well, how can I get involved? Well, you can't get involved because you're getting high and you can't come and get high. So, those sort of things that's where it can change the dynamic. And once you open that door of possibility of with a kid, and they're going to kick and scream, come on, that's what they're supposed to do. They're going to fight their way through whatever it is, becoming a responsible member of society, as we all did through adolescence. But once you have their attention, the possibilities are endless, and the success rate is just
goes through the roof. And again, thank you both, Jean and Brian. You gave 2 different examples of the one point I wanted to drive home, because I've seen this so much in the training and consulting I've done. Sometimes we just show up so adulting, right? And we're so wanting to like boss these kids around and do it the right way and have all these rules. And then we can't figure out why we can't get them to head in a certain direction. And so, Brian, your example of allowing for cursing, for example, right? Or Jean, your example of just like, let's get out of our own ways, because we are so deep into adulting that sometimes we forget how to have fun, right? So when we think about ideas for programming or, just different things we need to be focused on or not, just really challenging ourselves not to get so serious and adult-like that we become so unfun and so unengaging that they're really not interested in talking to us. Brian, real quick.
Yeah, just quick. So I do think in looking for mentoring programs, like looking for a diverse group of mentors. So, our strongest programs have some clinicians, they have some nurses, some school teachers, but they also have college students who just, love to play, have fun, and, I think what's great about like a larger group and a diverse group of mentors, like not every kid responds the same
Right.
way to an activity, and even the same kid, like you might have, a teenager, a youth who normally loves to play sports, and on this particular day, they're just quiet, and they'll go sit with a quiet mentor at that moment. And I think having that diverse range of mentors and even diverse range of kids in the program is critical.
I appreciate that, Brian. I want to shift us a bit to a heavier question in reality and see what you guys are thinking. By the way, this is not one of our planned questions, so get ready. I wanted to shout out to Mike Black, who was in the chat and sounded very desperate in trying to figure out a solution for one of the youth he's working with. So Mike, we see you, we hear you. We don't have a solution in this moment we can give you, but I just wanted to let you know that we saw you and I appreciate your commitment, and I can sense your desperation in trying to get an answer. So that led me to ask Brian and Jean you this question. What do you do when you're supporting a youth or a family and things aren't getting better? When they're not going in the direction, when you've tried and tried and tried, how do you manage that? How does your staff manage that?
For us, it's a process, and we just continue to ask and seek more advice and guidance in that situation. And in some cases, it gets to a point where there's some level of intervention that has to occur for the safety of family and such. We have a policy with the kids where there's no such thing as not showing up. If you're not coming, you have to let us know that you're not coming and why. If you don't show up, we default to something's wrong. And because we deal with these very serious issues, we go right to you're either dead or you're in a lot of trouble. So we always have our hand on the pulse, on their pulse, what's going on. And when we start to see changes in behavior, subtle, we start to move toward what kind of support, what we can do. But a lot of times the family dynamic is so strong and the situation is so strong that you're really up against, you're pushing a boulder up a hill. But having resources, and this comes back to what Brian's saying, is like, this is where you got to know your community. And this is where you got to be able to reach out, because at some point, and it may not be now, we've had kids who have just fallen away. We've stayed in touch with them through texting, the littlest things. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we'll hear from them, like, I need to get out of my house or whatever. So keeping some type of lifeline, some type of thread of communication. The co-founder of Road Recovery, Jack Bookbinder, is on here, is the administrator, the quintessential king of administration. And what he does is any young people that are part of Road Recovery at any time, he's still sending them information on a regular basis, newsletters, anything, reminders that things are going on. So even the ones that have fallen away, there's some light of hope out there. We had a young girl yesterday who came back who said, I'd fallen away and I was so ashamed to come back. And I remember what you guys always said to me is, there's no doors at Road Recovery, just show up. And when she showed up, we all laughed and we were all happy to see her. And she said, yeah, I remember you guys always say, never listen to what my mind is telling me. My self-chatter is what always does me in.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks for that specific story. I love to hear that. And those are some great examples. Brian, what are your thoughts when you're having someone who is not going in the direction you hoped and is not getting better?
Yeah, I mean, I would amplify everything Jean said. So I do think knowing what other options, what other resources there might be. So maybe, like, sometimes we have teenagers who just lose interest in the program, are kind of coasting through it, looking for things that would engage them. Are they dealing with some significant mental health issues? Okay, let's get them a therapist. or are they now interested in sports and no longer interested in our program? Okay, let's find them something. But I also think, we had a young woman recently who spoke. She was the commencement speaker at one of our graduation ceremonies for the younger kids camps. And she talked about when she was there, she struggled because we didn't have a teen program. And she came back and talked about how she wished that she had the teen program. And, I do think taking that approach and having open conversations with teenagers in particular, and as a prevention program, sometimes, we struggle with having mentors who, are focused really on no use at all, which is just not realistic. And so working with our mentors to have open conversations with teenagers and not cutting them off, because that, then there's no way to help them if, like Jean said, they drop out.
Right. Yeah, and good call. I just want to remind everyone too, let's make sure we're not doing therapy when we're not therapists. Let's
Correct.
make sure we're not doing treatment when we're not treatment licensed people. Like we all need to remember what lane we're in. And one of the things I will say, having worked in the clinical world for so long, and then when I came over to the mentoring world during my time as director of the Mentor Central Ohio, I sincerely mean this, and it's not to say that people in the therapy world are not empathetic, because they are, but boy, there's something about the hearts and minds of folks who are in this space. They're so caring. Everyone on this call, every single 281 of you, right? Biggest hearts. I know that because I see it every time I engage in this work in this specific field, right? And so it's almost, I've seen it be a blessing and a curse, because everyone in this call cares so much that if we're not careful, the caring can allow us to start venturing off into lanes that just aren't ours to be in. And I'll finish that point with this. I am a licensed clinician, and even as a licensed clinician, there are times when I'm working with whether it's a child or an adult or a family, and they're not getting better. I do this in coaching and in training with other clinicians. And people are always floored when I say it, but I tell clinicians all the time, you're not responsible for outcomes. And that sounds crazy to people, but we're not, even as a clinician, if I'm in a clinical role, I'm not responsible for outcomes. I'm responsible to share information and support for what the client says they want, not for what I want for them, right? Not for what I think they need. And so we have to be able to balance our care and our effort, right? In trying to get folks to better outcomes, to understand it's their work to do. And we can't force that outcome. And again, it's not really our outcome to get. So thank you both for reminding us of that. Brian, what'd you have?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it goes back to the first 3 of the 7 C's. I didn't cause it, can't control it, and can't cure it. And that's for our kids to learn about the substance use in their families. And also for us as mentors, as professionals that work with these youth and families, to also, we did a focus group with our mentors across the country, and they use the 7 C's as much as the kids do in the program.
Good. And Brian, I want to make sure you knew Peggy's in the chat, and if you haven't considered Midwest, she's in Nebraska, and I think she did a soft recruit.
All right, I saw that.
So just throwing that out there to make sure you know that Nebraska thinks highly of you and would love to have you in their world.
All right.
But I want to shift a little bit, because I think this is important as well when we talk about staying in your lane, right? Knowing what you can and can't do. Jean, talk to me about some of the limits of mentoring, and how do you train your staff? How are mentors trained to understand those boundaries and limitations? We know mentoring does a lot of great things and is a great I would see it as a supplement, right? To a lot of, like you said, all these other programs and folks that work, but how do you manage through the limitations, Jean, of mentoring and making sure, you know, that we're clear on what's what?
I think first of all, based on our mission statement, we draw from a certain population of folks from a certain industry who are coming to the table, who first and foremost have done some work. They've faced some adversity in their life. So they're coming to it having dealt with some type of medical therapeutic exercise in their life, coupled with what they do professionally in the industry. And it's the marriage of those two. So there's an openness there. And generally there's a like all these people on this call, there's a desire to give back. And for most of these people who have dealt with whatever the issue, they want to try to make a difference in the lives of youth. So they're humble and they're teachable. And that's key right across the board, because this is ever fluid, never changing. And
Wait a minute, did you say the adults are teachable and humble, or the kids?
No, the adults are.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, the adults are. It requires that. It requires that because of the responsibility. This is an enormous response. We always say we can either further damage these kids or we can be a solution. And we take it very seriously. And that's why there's certain trainings that we do. Again, we have supervision all the time. So there's no such thing as after every time we're with the kids, we have a debriefing meeting with the support of whatever that organization is and the responsible party for those kids. So there's, in real time, things are getting addressed. And so in real time, if one of our staff, just something's not sitting right in their stomach about something a young person says, within that hour, it's being handled, and there's follow-up. We also do pre-program where we get together with our mentors to talk about what did we do last week or last time, what are we facing today. We do a lot of advanced work to try to understand what are we walking into from the institution. You could have a kid that's happy last week and then all of a sudden they just found out this week their parents are getting divorced. Well, knowing that in advance and knowing how to, as Brian said, where a kid who's very loquacious and outgoing this week may come in and be really shut down. Well, why? Well, we have some insight as to why that is, so we know how to approach them. So there's a lot, we spend a lot of time around preparing, and I can't stress that enough. You have to prepare yourself, and your organization has to be ready, because we're living in a world of, I think we have seen things that are occurring in our society that we never even thought possibly could happen. And it's happening not to adults, it's happening to 6-year-olds.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that to me is extremely important as far as preparation and coming to it.
Thanks, Jean. Brian, really quick, we have 9 minutes left. Anything else you want to add, or do you think Jean hit it all?
I think Jean hit it. I would just, again, amplify the briefings before, the briefings after. When we did those mentor focus groups, that's what we heard. You know, we want more of those, and we want more specific training. So I put a huge plug for training. I mean, we do mandatory trainings, but we are working now with some researchers out of Clemson who are going to help us develop trauma-specific mentor trainings that everyone will have to go through. So
thank you, Brian. And I will just, as we jump back into these last key points, I will remind you all, as someone who, again, sat in a seat of a mentor affiliate and has been part of both using and designing many of the resources Mentor has. One of the jobs we had at Mentor Central Ohio, and that Mentor has, is to support mentoring programs and having those resources and having all of those policies and trainings in place. But what I saw time and time again is that folks are so passionate about the work, that they want to kind of skip the unfun part, right? Of getting the trainings ironed out and getting the policies ironing out and getting your measures in place and all of that stuff. I can't stress enough for you all, please make sure you're not cutting corners on what feels like the unfun part. But Mentor does a great job of giving those resources that you all need to make sure that you are prepared, as Jean recommended. So Delia, we'll go into the next slide. These are just a couple of my key approaches, as Jean and Brian shared theirs earlier. Please make sure you're showing up with a trauma-informed lens. The experience of having a loved one struggling with addiction and or struggling yourself is in and of itself a trauma. So please show up with that lens, show up understanding that there's a history here, right? Also, please make sure that you're aware of cultural nuances, needs, and preferences. You should have a culturally responsive approach, which means that you aren't just assuming that a Eurocentric or common way about going about things is the right way. And this doesn't mean you're racist. This just means that you're human and we all look through different lenses. So this is about cultural responsive, not necessarily race, but just keep an eye out for that. As Mentor always challenges us and teaches us, make sure we're being developmental, not prescriptive. So that means we're not fixing people and we're not giving them answers. We're challenging them by asking questions so that they have that growth mindset and that they begin to know how to get the answers for themselves, right? And then lastly, of course, empathy is required. And I think that's easier for us with youth. It's harder with youth who aren't behaving the way we think, especially I know there's a lot of folks on the call who again are in corrections. And so it's a little more difficult to be empathetic when they're out here behaving in ways that are illegal and potentially even hurting other people. But we've got to find a way to get empathy in the mix and make sure we're also being empathetic towards the families and the parents, right? We can't just come and save the kids and not have a care for their parents. Next slide, Delia, which is our last before we jump into the resources. Again, remember that no matter the crisis, the core solution is the same. So I've done training and I've been around for multiple movements, right? So we're in this opioid epidemic movement now. And listen, mentoring's mentoring. Mentoring works because it's about relationship. So while we do need to get trained up, don't forget, don't like wander off. The answers are still the same in what mentoring is all about, right? So show up with empathy, be humble, be open and supportive. As you said, Jean, the adults be humble, be open, right? Ready to learn, not just to teach. And remember, it's not always about doing something to make it better. It's about being there, right? And you guys have said that well throughout our webinar. So it's about being there. And that's what mentoring is all about, Delia. Thank you for this opportunity, Delia.
Wow. I'm still processing a lot of what I heard because it was so insightful and so interesting to hear everyone's perspective today. So I'm going to thank you all again in a few minutes because so much to thank you for. But I'm going to just quickly, we already did a lot of questions during our discussion, so we're going to move to some resources. I'm just going to wrap us up with a couple of things that we want our attendees to just know about if you're looking for more information, if you want some help actually kind of applying some of these recommendations to your programs, there's help available. So here we go. So the first resource I'd like to share is the OJJDP Opioid Affected Youth Initiative. This is something that Jean mentioned earlier. This initiative provides funding to states, local governments, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and tribal jurisdictions to develop data-driven coordinated responses to the opioid epidemic. Funding supports programs and services to youth and families impacted by both opioids and other substance use disorders. So to learn more about the initiative, check out the website that you see at the top right of your screen. So we just wanted to share a little bit of information about this other OJJDP funded programming that might be relevant to some of the work that you all are doing. A couple other resources from the National Mentoring Resource Center. So again, if you don't know about us, amazing website, tons of resources, but we have done some specific work around opioid use and substance use in general, in partnership, a lot of which has been in partnership with Elizabeth Joy. So if you want to hear more from her, you'll see a webinar in a moment that's reflected some of the work that she's done with us. But this here is a research review that's actually been a really comprehensive research review. So if you want to see what does the research say about these programs and what's effective and what works for young people. You heard so much from Jean and Brian about that today, but there's more out there if you're looking for more research. This is another website that just expands a lot on what we shared today. Hear from some other programs that are doing this work too, if you're looking for different models and different examples of what this work can look like. So we encourage you to check this out too. And again, you're gonna get the slide deck, so you'll be able to click these links in about a week. And then finally, technical assistance. So we work really hard at the NMRC to train our TA providers, who are our consultants that we are able to send out to work with local programs. And that's at no cost to the program due to the generosity of OJJDP, making that service available to programs at no cost. So we work hard to equip our TA providers with the knowledge to how to customize programming to youth who are dealing with the challenges that we talked about today. So we really do hope that you request technical assistance for your program. If you have a mentoring program or a youth development program and you want to incorporate mentoring, you want to address some of these issues, we hope you'll submit a request so that we can work with you a little bit more closely. And then finally, I want to share just a tidbit about a webinar that's coming up on Thursday that you may have seen us reaching out about. This is also a really important priority for OJJDP and something we care a lot about at the NMRC. And that is serving young people who have been impacted by commercial sexual exploitation. We're also going to be featuring 2 grantees, OJJDP grantees on that webinar as well, Youth Collaboratory and My Life, My Choice. So if you'd like to learn more about this issue that probably affects a lot of young people you work with, but you may not know that, and how to identify what are those risk factors, what are those red flags, what should I be aware of, this is definitely a webinar for you. We hope you'll come and join us on Thursday. But really, I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to Jean, Brian, and Elizabeth. I learned so much. I know a lot of folks were sending you some love in the chat, but I just want to say we really appreciate the work you're doing, the insights you shared with us today. So thank you, and thank everybody who joined us today for this great conversation. It's very important and obviously very relevant to a lot of the work that we all do. So thank you, everyone, and thanks for your presence today.
Thanks, Delia.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, Brian. Bye, Elizabeth.
Bye,
Get back to the beach, Elizabeth.
Back to the pool.
Back to-
Bye, everyone.
Take care.